How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the second season of Builder Interviews. This is actually our second attempt at this. I've got Mike Rinaldi here, and yeah, we're going to chat a little bit about his work. Basically, I'm just going to give him a chance to kind of talk because he's the expert here in this case. So, Mike, let us know who you are.
Who I am. Thank you, Zach. I appreciate that. And I am Michael Rinaldi. I am a professional scale modeler out of the West Coast U.S., currently in Portland, Oregon. And I have a small publishing company that makes hobby-specific books designed to teach you guys how to paint in weather to very high levels. And it's Rinaldi Studio Press. And I started this operation in 2012 after writing scale modeling articles for about 10 years for the various hobby magazines, To Me a Model Magazine, AFE Modeler, Military Miniatures and Review out of the US, which is no longer around. And I'm known mostly for the armor models and tank models that I've produced. But I did step into the Gundam world last year in 2017 with one of my books, SM03 Sasabi Custom, and Zach had reviewed it on his channel, and that's how we met and why we're here doing an interview now.
Yes, so thank you again for sending that to me. Mike was kind enough to send me that book to check out and share with you guys. Fantastic book, I have to say. So that's how we met, and I think you kind of laid out a lot of things that we can talk about there in that first little bit. I just kind of want to start off with kind of where you got started off with modeling, and there's a lot of interesting things that I want to hear about. Of course, it's kind of rare that people can hear the perspective of people who are professionals in the industry, working with magazines and producing books and all sorts of like professional content, aside from just the professional quality of their model
Absolutely.
kits. There's a lot to that. So
Yeah, there is. There's
yeah.
quite a bit. It's not. I'm also a unique situation in a very niche world of niche marketed publications. So because
Mm,
how I produce Rinaldi Studio Press and how I produce the Tank Art books and the SM books, it's not how the other publishers in the world actually do it either. So
mm,
I saw how they were doing things, and I decided to go a different direction. And
mm,
this stems from the fact that I've my training, my formal education is in automotive design. And I was a car
mm,
designer in the industry in America for almost 10 years prior to me even picking the hobby back up as a model builder just in general. And this goes back to the 20th century, actually. That's how old I
mm,
am.
yeah.
But I learned a lot of the processes of how when car companies review the competition, what they're looking for, what the baseline standards are, and then they go and produce the vehicles that they produce. And this is very commonly done. And Japanese car manufacturers will study the Germans and study the Americans, and they all study each other. And how this
Mm,
happens, and the process of that alone is how I kind of decided when I looked at publishing and decided to step away from that industry and step into the hobby industry as a professional. After writing magazine articles for almost a decade, I
mm,
decided to kind of go a different way. And some of the things I talk about and the way I shoot the models, the way is combined with the text context inside, was something I really wanted to focus on as a publisher because I read magazine articles, and we've all read them, all of you out there listening to this.
mm,
All the various magazine articles are fundamentally basically the same. You
mm,
buy the kit, you give a little history of the vehicle, you talk about the assembly process, and then you talk about the colors that you used to paint and weather it, in kind of a
mm,
really general, A plus B equals, whatever. And
mm,
I kind of wanted to branch away from that because in my model building experience, I'd gone to various competitions, particularly with the tank models, to Europe, which is where it's considered kind of the where the better guys are
mm,
quality-wise. And I participated in some contests. And when I finally got good enough and started to win some of these contests, and then guys would follow me on the internet forums prior to Facebook and all this time back like 2004, 2005, when I was making the name, when the name Michael Rinaldi was being applied to high quality armor models, and people were asking me these questions like how'd you do this, how'd you do that, what'd you do for this, how did the technique questions. And
mm,
I started to kind of combine the elements together of experience publishing, starting my own venture, and then what's the actual product going to be for the consumer. And really, I boiled it down to, and I talk about this in the books. You see this, and you've even mentioned it before in your
Mm-hmm.
review. But it's the how and the
Mm-hmm.
why, because I want to give the readers out there what's in my head, the
Yep.
mental aspect of how of why I'm actually approaching certain steps with certain products, with certain tools. That concept alone hadn't really been touched in the hobby very much.
Mm.
Some guys in general might have just randomly, talk about the why I'm doing this and why I'm doing this. But as a core of what the products are about is the how and the why. And every
Cool.
page and every book that I have, there is that combination of the two elements that work hand in hand to give the modelers kind of a better overview of, at this step here, this is where we're at, the story of the model and what product, chemical we're going to use with what type of tool we're going to use, and then the reasons of why that's all happening right then and there at the model. So that's how I launched Rinaldi Studio Press back in 2012, and with the tank art books in particular. And then I branched to the SM books, which are basically, SM books are a proportionally smaller version of tank art, and they just
Mm-hmm.
contain one model, and the graphics are slightly different. But the cores of high-end resolution, digital photography, with all the technology we have today, combined with the dual text format of the how and the why. And in the SM book
Mm-hmm.
in particular, it's denoted with an H or a W or a color of the text, black versus gray.
Mm.
That way it's called out and everybody can see, on each page what's going on. So that was kind of the how I really felt about, like, I want this product to stand above the rest in the sense that I'm going to give the modeler a little bit more of the behind the scenes, the mental aspects, what goes into top level model making when I'm doing this stuff,
Mm.
and then it translates out to, the readers out there that are trying to just make a better model, or there's contest builders that want to win these things, the guys really want to get competitive. What's it take to really do that? And that's kind of
Mm.
how I started this whole endeavor.
Yeah, that's yeah. Like you said, I mentioned that in the review because that's something that I found really interesting. I think it's super helpful, like as you're saying, for kind of teaching something, the how and the why.
Yeah. It's the pulling of the curtain back at the Wizard of Oz level stage. How is he really doing this? Because if you read a lot of magazines, and it doesn't matter if it's aircraft, armor, Gundam, if you read a lot of them, and the top guys, a lot of them don't tell you the secrets that they're actually really doing. And that's
Mm.
what was frustrating me, was like I could tell by looking at a photo in a magazine and what the guy was talking about. And usually I would know the authors by this point in time, know him personally.
Mm-hmm.
I know he's not telling people things, and they'd
Yeah.
hold back because they don't want to give their secrets out. And I decided, you know what, screw that. Everybody, I mean, what do I really care? I mean, it's just like a
Yeah.
chef with a recipe. It's like I'm still gonna paint the way I paint. It doesn't really matter, and I don't compete much, so I'm not concerned about the ego aspects of things. And
Yeah.
if you can really share, these guys will be like, whoa, okay, that's what he's doing. You
Yeah.
know?
Right. And I totally get that feeling. I never actually thought about that until you mentioned it. But yeah, when you see stuff in magazines, you can see uh, exactly. You can see how
Mm-hmm.
you can see what they're doing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, they're doing this at this particular step. But yeah, especially when you're applying it over different mediums, and that's one thing is like applying different weathering techniques and things like
Yeah.
that normally used on different things like armor,
Mm-hmm.
tanks, and vehicles and things like that. A lot of that can be applied to other things, other sci-fi models like Gunpla and things like that. But I think understanding the why is really important because you have to know kind of why you're applying those steps,
Mm-hmm.
and then be able to translate that to Gunpla. It won't translate exactly the same,
No.
but if you understand the reasoning behind it, you can kind of make it work and kind of
Yeah.
adapt it to different things. It's very, very helpful indeed, I
Yeah.
think.
That was really what I was after. And
Mm.
I do get quite a bit of emails on a rather regular basis of guys like, dude, I never, I've been going to these IPMS contests or these shows or whatever all this time, and I never get anything when I go. I put my models down. I never, I take them home.
Mm.
And he said, yeah, I took a silver medal in my category this last show. And he's like, it's because I've been reading your books and trying. It's like I get this kind of stuff. I'm like, okay, I know it's working now. Like that's what was
Mm.
kind of really hitting home for me. Like, okay, these guys get this. Like they're absorbing the material.
Yeah.
So
So pretty much every person that I've ever heard give any feedback about the books, mostly I hear kind of mostly feedback about the Sazabi book being in the world that I'm in,
yeah,
but it's pretty much always positive. I think the only negative thing I've ever heard was someone said that it's a lot of words, it's a lot of reading, but like it's a book, so I don't really know what they expected. But
And I hear that too, because there are theories out there that men just are visual learners and stuff, and the reality of it is there's actually a lot of photographs in those books, and that's with the
yeah,
SM books, if you count the photographs out, I mean you're in the hundreds of photographs in a 136 plus page book, and it's that thing. It's like there's very few people. Like if I look at the common denominators, and that's like if the guys are reading the books and they've got the kit in front of them or a kit in front of them, and they want to kind of get through the steps and learn the processes, not all of them are going to pick it up purely just from the photos. I mean that's a silly assumption that that's going to happen, which
of
is
course.
I think what a lot of magazines actually really do. Some of the other stuff, it's heavy photos and there's just a blurb of text.
Yeah.
I'm really actually trying to teach somebody something. The educational value is it has to have the word context as a foundation, because you only need to read it one time or two times, and then you can kind of reference it as a photo thing. Like, okay, you did this here. Oh yeah, I remember he tells me about this, and you kind of that's the purpose of the book. It's not designed to be read and then put away. So, which is
Yeah, I
also
think
why the size is what it is. It's supposed to fit on your bench without taking up a lot of desk space too.
that I definitely like the size as well. I mean, I hadn't thought about that aspect of it, but I just like it because it's unique. It's different from the normal size. But yeah, it reads very much like you're just having a conversation with someone like that about that. So
It's funny you say that because I get in trouble. The English teachers out in the world that are also model builders that will write me and they'll just berate me over the grammar. And I go, it's because I want it to literally be two guys at a bar or two guys at a workbench having a conversation like you and I are right now. That's the point.
sure.
And they're
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, I understand now. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Personally, I really enjoy that style of writing. But yeah, I can see how it might bother some people. But and yeah, like you're saying, you're trying to cover the how and the why, and so obviously there's going to be more involved with that. But so yeah, I think that should be
Yeah.
expected anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in summary of that, I think we can pretty much say that the books are highly recommended. But let's just take a step back. And you mentioned there briefly in like your first bit, you were saying that you came back into the hobby. So I'm interested what you did at first that you then kind of stepped away from for a
I
while.
probably have, a classic story, or a lot of guys probably have these stories where we did this as kids. I was introduced, I'm almost 50, I'm 47. So going back to the 70s, when I was 70s and early 80s, model kits weren't anything like what we see today. But my dad coming off of, I come from somewhat of a military family. A lot of my uncles and cousins and stuff, and my father, they all served in the military, most of them in the Air Force. So my dad was always building model planes, monogram jet kits and stuff like that. And so I grew up as kind of wanting to be a pilot and wanting to do all that stuff. So model building was always a part of, kind of the weekend routines of, spending a couple hours, and my dad would do it too, and I would do it. And then as I got older into high school and in that age, cars and girls and sports and, school takes up
Yeah,
your time. So
sure.
most of us drop model building because it's kind of shunned. It's shunned in Western cultures, I would say, as kind of the geek
Yeah.
nerd culture. And back then, it wasn't what the geek nerd culture is today, which is because thankfully movies and have changed. Comic book movies have changed that around dramatically for us, which is wonderful because it's exploding,
Yeah.
as a thing all around us. And that's what happened. So when I went through high school and then college and came out, and like I said, I was started as a car designer and I was working in the automotive industry, and that's a heavy, stressful, pressure-driven industry. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
deadlines, a lot of we have to compete and succeed. And it's working with the German companies, and it's even more structured towards just kind of cutthroat competition. And if you can't
Yeah.
take it, it did. It kind of spit me out the backside, and I was like, okay, I've had enough of this. And during that time frame, which was like I said, about 15 years ago, I kind of picked up. I found some boxes that I'd had from the 70s and 80s in the garage. And they were full of old armor kits, old model kits from the 70s and 80s. Opened them up and like, oh, look at this. And then that's about the same time that the web forums started to be created. The internet blew up, and web forums dedicated to scale modeling were around. And you get on the internet and you start searching around back in the old days of searching. And I stumbled across something, and it was this website called Missing Links, which was a big tank modeling website. And that was like the opening for me. And then once I started realizing, oh, there's guys out there doing that, and it was global. So you got to meet all these other, international people, which was cool to me. And then it was basically starting to build models, take pictures of them, put them up on these web forums, like what we see today on Facebook and everything else. But this was kind
Sure.
of you had to have like a photo hosting site, you had to put your photos in the photo site, and you had to, type in the link and, cut and paste the link into the forum thread. And some forum threads wouldn't let you post pictures. You just put a link to another thing. And so, it was kind of this real fumbling around of sharing
Yeah.
your work, really is what it was. And that's when I really got the bite. Like I was dabbling before, like just a lot of kids probably do.
Yeah.
But combining that, so what happened was, I guess the formal education of, I went to school, I learned color theory. I actually had a class like on color theory, and I had all these like artistic background foundation classes all kind of underneath me now. So when I came back into this, like my painting was on point, and that was kind of people like, oh wow, okay. And then that's how I became kind of, popular that way, was guys really liked the paint jobs, but a lot of it to me was based on the fact that I had formal training in color theory, warm and cool shades and what that really means. And then I became obsessed, coincidentally, with like, taking a really good photo, because I was just obsessed as a designer. Like I'm that kind of guy. Like I just obsess
Yeah.
about that shit. So then I start studying cameras and start taking pictures of it, and then, working with different background papers and different light sources and trying to take really good photographs of the models and then put those on the web forums. And then that's when the publishers noticed me. And then that's how that whole thing started. They'd write me and go, hey, Mike, would you mind, that model you just put up, can we get an article from you on that? And so that's how that all started. So, and so you're like in 2003, 2004, 2005. That's when all this was going down.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at that time, you were both mostly focused on, like you said, your scale models, tanks, and things like that. Were you kind of aware of other like Gunpla or Machine and Krieger or like Star Wars,
Absolutely.
any
No,
other model kits?
Mac was huge.
Uh-huh.
Definitely. And I remembered, see, I'd had a huge, growing up, animation in America and the US, especially like Los Angeles and that kind of stuff. We had like the afternoon school TV cartoons and stuff, and Voltron was part of that. Macross, Robotech World was part of that for a while. So I was always interested in that stuff. And I also grew up, big Godzilla fan, all that kind of stuff. And so those are all big, because all the scale modeling in the Godzilla movies, I mean, they're kind of cult classics now, but that was something that was really influential to me. And then the Tamiya kits, which were used in a lot of those movies, and then working with those model kits, and then of course Bandai. I did start to buy, I would, and then eBay popped up too. So then you could basically buy whatever you were looking for through eBay. You'd find all these vintage. I had a lot of vintage Gundam kits. However, those vintage ones are really hard to work with. They're all two-piece parts and
Yep.
seam molding, sanding stuff together. And so I had dabbled. I had definitely dabbled and played around with them. I'd never done a full kit and a full build in the Gunpla world, or even anything related to it in science fiction, mechs, whatever. I had stuff in my stash, but I'd not done a dedicated, because what was happening was the publishers were really starting like, dude, can we get this one? And so I'd do these really full-on builds of armor, and I just play with the other stuff a little bit. I get like half one, so I had a lot of shelf queens, stuff, and some of them are in my closet now. I've got some old early resin, from the ZZ Gundam world, and I'm a big fan of Kondo style of Gundams. The real kind of, it's basically a Mac version of Gundam with military flavoring.
Yeah.
So some of that stuff I was always into, and I'd gotten books on some of the hardcore animators and stuff like that. The early Mac books on like how they were being drawn out, and Sensei was doing all that kind of stuff, and Yokohawa, or however you say his name, which I will butcher all the names, by the way. Everybody out there listening, I will butcher everybody's name. I'm the guy that never remembers the name of the song or the band or the dude, or that's me. So just accept that I will butcher a name. But
sure.
that's what I had, all that background stuff. I had a lot of it. I just professionally was never doing it because demand was basically for the tank models, which was there's a good number of magazines around the world at the time. And then Facebook blew up, and that whole thing happened. And then now YouTube is the next great landscape for model building. And this is ridiculous. So those of you who have kind of done the path I've done, where 2003, 2004 web forums, and then Facebook. Now YouTube, and everybody taking a video and everybody sharing. There's a whole nother level of depth to people out there reaching, and like you, for example. I never even knew you existed until the whole review process, and then you go to YouTube and it's like, well, he's doing what? Like, what's he doing? And like that whole thing is just like, whoa, you know. So like I'm just scratching the surface of a little bit of a subject matter. So it's kind of a big deal.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's opportunities. I think it's really interesting that there's that kind of double-edged sword about being a professional.
Hmm.
And when I talked with Lincoln last year about
Hmm.
this, he obviously talked a lot about the same thing. When you're a professional, you have like it's quite demanding, and
Yes.
you don't really have as much time for doing as much things that like maybe you'd want to do, other side projects, things like that.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, there's pros and cons to it, right?
Well, there's to everybody listen again. It's this is my job. This is my career. This
Yeah.
is what I do, 9 to 5. I actually do it 7 days a week. I'm always doing something. I'm a one-man company.
Hmm.
I've got all the design skills to be a publisher, so that's okay. But I made my bed and I sleep in it. So that kind of analogy, and I respect that. But honestly, every model I build, if I'm building a model, I had better be taking a photograph or a video of it and doing some sort of production aspect to it, whether it's printed in a book or put up on Facebook, to always push the company forward. Because
Hmm.
I don't have employees. I'm not contributor based, which is the main difference between my publications. Even though I use a guest author occasionally in a tank art book, I'm not a contributor-based company. So all the other publishers out there, all the people that like Lincoln was a contributor, so he
Hmm.
was being demanded by the editors. Okay, you've got like
Hmm.
in some cases, if you've listened to Lincoln's story, he's got some crazy stuff where it's like 24-hour bills or 48
Yeah.
hours or
Yeah.
those. Like I would just flat out refuse that. I wouldn't even bother wasting. I mean, you can't pay me enough to do that anymore.
Hmm.
So, and that's the other side of publishing as a contributor is that the pay is really, really low. Magazine
Hmm.
article writing is it's a really kind of a side gig.
Hmm.
You don't make a lot of money, and if I even tried to do the math, like okay, if I built 2 models a month and wrote an article on those, and I took those 2 models articles and then sold those to 5 different magazines in the same month, different language, you can sell to Italian, French, German, Japanese, and English.
Yeah.
They'd let you do that. You could probably make a thing, but that kind of grind, that kind of pressure to build that
Yeah.
fast and paint, and here's the downside of this too is when you go to, like, for example, when I went to it was a contest called Euromilitaire, and it was held in the south of England every September, and it'd gone on for 20 years, 25 years show. It's actually done now, and then trying to come back. But it was of the tank modeling world. It was like if you won a gold medal at that show, you were considered somebody, and like you were considered like okay, you've made it.
Yeah.
The problem is once you've done that and you become a professional, they've seen that level of work. And so if you're writing magazine articles or book articles and you're trying to get them done fast, your work
Hmm.
suffers. Well, I spent
Yeah.
6 months painting something for a show, excuse me, and then to do it like in a week, even full time, is like, dude, there's no way. Like you
Yeah.
can't put the same level of finish into something everybody's considered your standard. So now I've got you're constantly fighting. You're only good as your last model, kind of a thing, and that's a syndrome
Hmm.
of when professionals start to build fast. You will see the work suffer. You will actually see like, dude, that like the one he did like last month was way better than this one, and that's
Hmm.
because he's basically being ground into a little pebble, and that's the
Yeah.
problem with that kind of thing. Where guys like Lincoln will always say yes, and I was that guy too. I'm like, dude,
Yeah.
I will, hey, whatever, because you're getting a new kit. You're getting, oh yeah, I get to do that. Sure, it's awesome.
Uh-huh.
But then that pressure is like, oh, or it doesn't fit right. Then you're sanding and gluing and all that stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, there's got to be, I mean, as demanding as it gets, and like as hard as it gets, and as much as you might want to say no, I'm sure there's still going to be that, just that kind of draw of being able to say like I'm a professional modeler. Like you don't want to let that go, right?
Not anymore, because I tell you what, geek culture rules. So the women love it. So you can use it as an opener. If you're out and about, and like I used to be shy. So there's that level. People think they're like, what are you doing? And so now it's cool. Now it's fun. And even just in
Yeah.
social settings. So it's kind of one of those weird things because my friends actually all know what I do now, but they all, when they see that, when I was actually presenting books to people, like they like, what do you do? I'm like, yeah, here's one of my books. They're like, whoa, you do this? Like, this is what you do? And they're like, there's actually a job for this? Like, people will
Hmm.
say that, they're like, I'm like, yeah, and I actually kind of created a job for it, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a lot of like kind of admiration for being able to do what you love, right? That's kind of the
Yeah, it's
big dream these
definitely,
days, right?
like I said, it's a job. So there is
Yeah.
the discipline required, and I do work from home,
Hmm.
which is oftentimes people think that's glorious. It's not. I
Yeah.
would love to be able to have an office space, assistants and staff, and that's my career my end game as a company is what's the next level? Well, it's expanding the catalog, producing more books, and then having those books be able to afford I know, professional space, and then legitimate professional employees that you hire on that handle all the shipping needs, all the customer service needs, all those things that I actually still do. I do all the marketing, I do all the advertising, I do all the bookmaking, photography, text writing, editing, and I handle all the printers, all the sales. I handle all the dealer sales, all the global sales, all the distribution. So it's like those tasks become a job, and it literally that's why I do this 7 days a week. So
yeah, you would surely have to. I can only imagine.
Yeah, 2017 was not the best year for me production-wise. I got the Sasabi book out and then one reprint. So 2018, this year in particular, I've announced 5 new titles. There'll probably be 2 to 3 reprints of older stuff that's out of print the first half of the year, and then the second half of the year, I'm really going to hit it hard with some brand new titles as well. So I'm actually gunning hard this year to kind of take it up.
While you bring up the topic, there's something else that I wanted to move on to. But while you're on the topic, why don't you talk a little bit about what you have coming up?
Okay.
If you want, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, I started this endeavor with the tank art series, and if you're not familiar with tank art, it's up to 4 now. And basically, what I do is I take the generations of armor and the like German World War II armor is a major subject matter. So that's one series of books. Then I do the Allied, which is the U.S., the French, the British in World War II, Russians, and then I do a modern. And in our military historical world, anything after World War II we contain is under the modern umbrella. What was going on with that was those are really large books. They're 5 to 6 models. They're 280 plus pages now. So I decided to introduce a small series of books that I can manage to produce as one man, one kit, one book, and that's the SM series. Number 3 was a Sabi book, and I wanted to take the SM series and put Rinaldi Studio Press into every genre in the hobby. So you've got civilian guys that build trains and construction equipment, and then fantasy builders that do kind of non-Gunpla, fantasy type building. And then there's the military guys, of course, and then there is the Gunpla specifically, and then there's the Star Wars people. So there's genres of groups of model builders around the world, and some are bigger than others, of course, and Gunpla is enormous. I think last I'd heard, I think it was somebody from Bandai or somebody said, the entire Gundam world is about $80 billion in revenue a year. So as a company, I want a piece of that pie. That makes sense. Yeah. So that's the Sasabi book. And the reason the Sasabi book, SM03, is what it is because I took some of my military style, which is what I was known for, so everybody knows me for that, and then I kind of dabbled it onto your world, which is why the Sasabi's not red, and it's all talked about in the book, of course, and as I'm kind of newer to the Gunpla professional side of things, I don't want to just jump in and start doing hyper-accurate stuff and then not having all the information that you should. I'm going to sound like an idiot because I just don't know everything guys like you know. So I have to get up to speed as it is, and so what I've done is that's my intro, SM03 with the Gunplas, and then now what I'm going to do is the tank guys don't have an SM book, so they're getting their SM book next. And then now it's aircraft coming up too, so I'm doing some World War II aircraft for SM6. 5 is a little tractor that kind of fits in between. To me, it does a box art. It's beautiful. It's a little airfield tractor with a tone and aircraft across the airfield. The little tractor's a kit, and then the airplane on the back of that, which is also painted on the box art. I'm like, that would be a great book to do, is just do the box art contents, the tractor and then the plane. So that's SM5 and that's SM6. And then there's some new other, and I need to hit the aircraft guys pretty hard. They've been chewing in my ear for a couple of years now, like, when do we get our books? So there's some airplanes for this year, and then probably you're going to see a heavy science fiction book in the tank art size. There's rumors going around the studio here at Rinaldi Studio Press Enterprises that it could be a Star Wars book, just because Bandai has killed it with the new Star Wars kits.
Indeed, yeah.
So that's something I've been looking at really seriously, and then I've got a small collection of Gundams set up for its own large book, which will probably be 2019, realistically looking at my schedule. So.
Well, speaking on like Gundam and especially Star Wars, I know one thing that can be tricky is just like legal issues. How have you handled that?
Don't scare me away already.
Yeah. Well, did you have any issues like that with the SM3?
No, so far there's been nothing, and that could just be because I'm small enough, or I'm too small to
Mm-hmm.
worry about. I do use the word Bandai, and the way I've looked at it, the way publishers I've worked with in
Mm-hmm.
this type of copyright issues thing. For example, there's Fine Molds, another Japanese manufacturer, has made a lot of the Star Wars vehicles and other scales before Bandai really
Uh-huh.
got the bug to do all the stuff. If you just call it what's on, like if I said I'm going to build a kit of A, B, C, and D, and that's the text that's on the top of the box, you're legally allowed to say that.
Yeah.
So I can say it's a Star Wars, Slave One from Empire Strikes Back or whatever it is. Like you can
Yeah.
say that stuff. What I cannot do, as far as I know, is I obviously can't use any logos.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't put any kind of copyrighted logo in my thing without written permission.
Yeah.
And I can't call it anything that would make the impression that it was sponsored by Star Wars or that this was a licensed product. So my
Okay.
book will be called. So each series, I do a tank art series, I do an airplane art series, I do a construction art series. So there's an art series of these large books.
Okay.
Sci-fi art will be the name of that particular series, and or mech art. So there'll probably be two. Mechs would kind
Uh-huh.
of contain Gunpla, and then all the other walking robotic mech kits that are available to us today. It's
Yeah.
kind of an overall series, and then what I would put,
Sure.
I'd put like a name underneath that because like it says tank art for German armor, so it'll say
Mm-hmm.
mech art one. I think I don't know if I could use the word Gundam on the cover or Star Wars on a cover or something like that, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe I'll say Resistance. So I can say Sci-Fi Art 1, The Resistance, which would
Mm-hmm.
imply, the good guys in Star Wars. And then on the side would
Sure.
be X-Wing fighters and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's how what everybody has told me. There's a large distributor in the United States called Bluefin, and they handle a lot of the
Yep.
Gunzi coloring and a lot of the kit distribution for
Uh-huh.
America. And they say,
Sure.
yeah, as long as you don't use, there's words that cannot be copyrighted. Like in other words, origins cannot be copyrighted.
Uh-huh.
Blood can't be copyrighted. So you can use some of the terminology without basically using actual copyrighted stuff. So you just have to kind of be careful. But you
Yeah.
can still definitely do it because honestly, they've been producing articles on all these kits for years without anybody being sued. So it's fine. You know,
Yeah. And
it's only the kit manufacturers that really have to pay the licensing because they're putting logos on this stuff.
yeah, 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 yeah. Sure. And you'd think that if anything, all you're doing is helping out with their sales anyway. So why would they care?
Yeah,
But I
no.
know it's Disney.
Lucasfilm gets a little, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Lucasfilm was real cutthroat. I knew this before Disney bought them, just in the design world. So in the car design world, a lot of my colleagues or students I went to school with that were all doing car design. A lot of them branch into concept design, movie design. So I have a lot of friends in that world that do behind the scene design work for Disney now and Lucasfilm before, and ILM and all this kind of stuff. And because video games have also is the other aspect that's really blown up this culture.
Sure.
And so that's where they got real cutthroat with it. But guys like me, I'm so small, but I'd heard stories where Lucasfilm was suing, nobodies,
Mm-hmm.
for just because they were going to do like a cast resin version of a movie prop.
Mm-hmm.
And so they get real aggressive. But and a side story that's related to this is if anybody's out there listening, some of you may know that Revell, Revell Monogram, which is a big U.S. plastic kit manufacturer, went bankrupt recently, a couple months ago, and they went through somebody had just bought Revell. And the bid on Revell was actually like $3.9 million for the company, which if you think about it, is not a lot of money in the business world. But
Sure.
there was a contingency in that bid that you had to pay $1.4 million in copyright fees to Disney because Revell was making Star Wars kits.
Uh-huh.
Bandai got Europe and Japan, and Revell got the U.S. licensing apparently, which
Uh-huh.
sucks because the Revell kits are really for kids. They're like snap tights, and
Yeah.
they're not really anywhere near as nice as what Bandai has been doing. So,
Yeah.
for example, for me, this is important for me because I'm buying the Bandai kits out of eBay out of Japan so I can fill
Mm-hmm.
my books with them versus
Mm-hmm.
buying the Revell kits because the Revell kits weren't anywhere near as nice. I'm like, but anyway,
Yeah.
the Revell bankruptcy was contingent on a licensing fee to Disney for like 1.4 million. So, yeah.
Interesting. Just on a side note here, I'm wondering about another property that we haven't really touched on, or a company we haven't really touched on, is Kotobukiya. And
Yes.
Kotobukiya is one of, I mean, just to name a couple of their main series, like
They're
Zoids, Frame
huge.
Arms, Frame Arm Girls.
They are huge. I do have a couple of the frame arm kits. That I think that's an interesting story because they kind of came out of nowhere from a Western perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how long the company had been around, if they were an offshoot of Bandai employees starting their own thing, whatever, however the develop. That would be a great story to find out of how
Mm.
Kotobuki you blew up because they're
Mm-hmm.
huge now. Like they make everything, and it's
Yeah.
impressive, very impressive. And I do have some of their kits. Oh yeah, I think it's in the Frame Arm series, and they're kind of big, bulky. And that's so like for example, when we talk
Mm-hmm.
about like you and I, when we talk about Gunpla, and I bring up the word mecha and mechs. There's a whole offshoot series that they've been doing. I've been paying some attention to it because they're a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more military based kind of style, walking
Sure.
mechs on the ground, not flying through space.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of design work. And I was like, okay, that would be kind of a cool crossover for me to play with too. So I do have a couple of them, yes. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
the names of them because honestly, all the box arts are literally almost all in Japanese, and
Yeah.
I'm hopelessly lost. So I'm a newbie
Uh,
in it and all that, but I am familiar with what you're talking about.
okay, cool. But yeah, I'm just kind of just interested in maybe what other things that you might be interested in, what other things we might see from you in the future.
I would say definitely yes to that. Okay, so probably how I will break it down for you guys out there listening, from what's going to happen for the next 18 months to 2.5 years, 3 years from me, specifically to your world.
Mm-hmm.
There will probably be at least one or two more SM books on specific Gundam kits. There will
Mm-hmm.
probably be a large tank art form of book, mech art, and probably a sci-fi art both that would contain Star Wars and or what we just talked about with the frame arm
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
as kind of a compilation series. So I might even in the mech art book throw in a Gundam or two anyway. And then
Yeah.
Gundam books will probably be there will be their own Gundam thing, and it will be specific to the animation. In other words, I talk about that in SM3, where I say, hey, look, there's more books coming. They will look like the animation.
Mm-hmm.
And I will actually attempt to do stuff where, and I don't know the style of it, what you guys would call it, but the guys that basically really, really nice high-end paint jobs on those things, but they're not weathered at all. Like they're just
Uh-huh.
immaculate little display models. And I don't know what that term would be called for that, but they're basically
Um,
non-weathered, but they're all decaled out, and the paint jobs, they're all repainted and beautifully, finished.
just clean, I guess. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, that's what I think too. I don't think there's a
Clean
name. Yeah, I
build.
was
Yeah.
wondering, but the clean ones are, there will be a
Mm-hmm.
couple of those too, which will be great because I won't have to weather them. But
Sure.
some of the G system kits, some of the other non-Bandai stuff, I might dabble with too because I am. So the beauty of Armor is that we're highly, highly familiar with resin, photo etch, metal
Mm-hmm.
upgrade parts. This is our world too. So
Yeah.
we both play with that, and I've got
Mm-hmm.
actual drawers of upgrade parts and weapons and thrusters and beads and stuff like that to really go to town on a few Gundam kits without the weathering. Just real clean builds that some of the guys really love. So.
Here, here's a question though. Do you ever think that, I mean, or kind of how long do you think it will take to get to a point where you just kind of covered everything and you're just kind of running out of ideas of what you could possibly do next?
Truthfully, if anybody's paid attention to the amount of kit releases happening in the hobby as a whole, that will never happen. There's not enough.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
not fast enough. Number one, I'm not Lincoln Wright. I
yeah,
mean, that boy can crank stuff out. I'm slow. Let's just face it.
yeah.
I'm pretty slow with my model building, but I have certain goals in mind with that. So no is the answer because I've had this conversation with a few people. There's so many kits, so many subjects, and especially a guy like me. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not just in one subject matter. There's a lot of guys that just all they do is they'll do like one subject and one theater of operation. Like they'll
Yep.
do Hungary, the battle in Hungary in 1945 before the end of the war. That's all they do. And I'm
Okay.
not that guy. I like everything. So my problem
Yeah.
is that, and my
Mm.
stash just grows daily because it's like there's so many new things to. No is the answer, simply
Okay.
because there's so much to do.
Yeah. Sure. And
I'll physically wear
whatever.
I'll physically wear out before my eyes will go, my back will go. Yeah.
Well, good to hear. So, then the one thing that I wanted to also get into is kind of other modelers. I know you've mentioned a few people and just kind of hinted to about other people that you know, but kind of when you were first getting back to it back in like your forum days,
hmm
I'm wondering who were like any particular modelers that you were like really in contact with or just like looking up to, and then like even now today, who are like some of the people that you really uh,
Yeah, I would
like
think
to.
it's funny because I would think most of you guys out there, if you're Gundam modelers for that's what you do, you won't recognize the names. You might
Mm-hmm.
know one or two. Even my name, you wouldn't even know who I would be. realistically speaking, because the communities we're so tight, we're so small. But like I said, a lot of guys don't branch out, so they only do that. Miguel Jimenez, the guy who runs Ammo, who started AK Interactive, obviously is probably the most famous name out there. Lincoln writes for his product, his company, the Weathering magazine. That's Miguel Jimenez. Mig, as everybody knows him, Mig is he's from Spain. Mig started a couple years prior to me on the same Missing Links web. Missing Links, the portal, that website, which still exists today, is kind of the core. It's the mecca, in the terms of MECCA mecca of armor modeling. It was the original home of all the hardcore guys, and so those are the names I know. There's another gentleman who I give full credit to as much as I can every time I write about it or talk about it. Phil Stosinkas is I think he's Polish by birth, Belgium or Polish generation, but he lives in Belgium, now in the UK. Introduced the hairspray chipping technique to the armor modeling world in 2007, and he was a best of show winner. So he didn't just win his category; he won the whole freaking contest. Kind of model. He actually works for Forge World now. So those in the 40K Hammer group of people, tabletop gaming, he's still pretty prominent in that genre. So there was Mig was one of, and there was the one American guy I'm actually good friends with, Adam Wilder, who now has Wilder products, and Wilders are pigments and weathering chemicals and videos and tutorials on also on armor modeling. But Adam is very well known around the world. Adam and Mig, and Adam actually worked for Mig for a while when Mig had Mig Productions, which was his first company. And these were the influencers of when I was kind of like, I would study these guys' work, Phil and Adam and Mig in particular, and then you get to meet them. And so when you start to travel to these shows, unfortunately, there's no West Coast American shows that are worth a shit. So nobody comes to, other than unless you're going to the beach to get a tan, nobody comes to California or anything like this in the model building world, which is hilarious because all the hardcore design work for cars, for movies, for video games, it's all West Coast based, from Seattle to LA, that's where this all happens. So it's hilarious that there's no model building culture here. Like in my town of Portland, there's one or two guys that I know. A couple, Rick Lawler is one who's written for same company that writes, they wrote for Lincoln. But there's really nobody in my part of the world that I hang out with, or the only other, if you guys are interested in kind of the product side of things, Mission Models is a Los Angeles-based company that's introduced a new water-based acrylic paint line last year that is, in my opinion, probably the finest paints available on the market today. And I used them in the Sasabi book, SM03, and I talk about them, and that was kind of the introduction to them. But they use a really, really high-end fine art grade quality pigment in their paints, which those of you interested in the chemical conversation, Tamiya, Gunzi, all these kinds of stuff, all the pigments that are based in those paints are really, really low grade pigments because they're buying in bulk and they're making a really low cost product. I mean, it's a $3 bottle of paint.
Sure.
So the Mission Model stuff was an idea to really take a really high end type of paint, and it comes from a company that is well known for illustrators, airbrush artists that paint 2D work. The fingernail painters or you paint the gas tank on a custom motorcycle with an airbrush. Those paints you use, the type of ink that's inside of that and the pigments inside of it are really, really high end. And so we've gone that direction with things. And I do a lot of the graphic design work for them and stuff like that. And so you'll see me talk about them a lot because the other side of things that were killing me, and this is something I've never talked to Lincoln about, but he mentions it a lot. He uses lacquers a lot. He has to go outside a lot to do this stuff. I work from home, and I've sprayed lacquers for about a decade. I'm over it. I'm done spraying enamels and lacquers. And those of you listening out there, I think the time has come for a lot of us to really take our health a little bit more seriously, the environment a little bit more seriously. Because even if you have a full-blown spray booth, you're wearing a mask, you're still putting this stuff everywhere. And I just kind of stopped. I said I'd had enough. I wasn't feeling a lot of headaches. I mean, we're talking, and I'm not talking eye strain headaches. I'm talking when you're painting Tamiya lacquers and you can thin them with lacquer thinner for hours on end. I mean, dude, it was brutal. It was just getting to the point where trying to find solutions around this, because it's great because Lincoln in the Mac world, he does a lot of hand brush painting, which is a very unique style. But to the bulk of the hobby, we all use an airbrush. So you're atomizing this stuff, you're spraying it around, And I know guys never want to, and this is the other thing, you're dealing with the male psyche. Nobody wants to hear this part of it, trust me. But the Mission Models paints are pure water-based. I mean, they're non-toxic. They're all organic chemicals. And I know it sounds like a health pitch, but honestly, it kind of really is, because I'm not getting any younger. We're not getting any younger. And I got a lot of model builds. I got a lot of models to build and paint. And so, I'm kind of starting to attach myself to companies that really take that part of things a little bit more seriously now. Because, if you go to a hobby show, if you've been to a competition, the physical look of a model builder. And in the Western culture, it's not a good look. We're usually overweight. We're chewing burgers down, all day long, and spraying lacquers all night long, and enamels. If you're from Europe, Humbrol enamels and Revell enamels and all these things. You're spraying enamels. These are you need like an automotive spray booth to process this stuff, really.
Yeah.
So I do take that a little bit more seriously now, and I'll talk about it in the books a little bit, because I do want us to be around a while. I want our kids to, your kids to, want to build and paint, and it's stuff that works. So this Mission Models paint's cool. It's and I can make it sing and dance like I can make a lacquer spray. So that's important to me and to you guys.
Well, yeah, sure. I know just from experience of what I've heard from people, it's kind of like when people are wanting to get into airbrushing, like usually the number one excuse is, oh, it's too expensive. Number two excuse is I just don't have the proper like setup. I don't have a way to set up a spray booth or ventilation or like that. I don't have windows in my space.
I'm the same way. I can't do this. I can't do anything with my apartment as far as a spray booth is concerned, where I live. And so these are pure. There's no odors. There's no toxicity levels. They're pure water. You can clean up with water. You can spray with water. They have a proprietary thinner that works brilliantly. The entire product line is this way. So it's something I took, and I was using like Vallejos, which is also from Spain. The ammo paints. A lot of these are actually also water-based paints, but to get them to actually work really well, you have to use a lot of the harsher chemicals. For example, the ammo paints are a full-on acrylic line of paint. To get them to really spray the way we really want things to spray in the hobby world, honestly, Mr. Color leveling thinner works brilliantly with it. Well, then now you're back to thinning with lacquer thinners, and so Mission Models paints doesn't have any of those crutches that it requires to work well. Like even Tamiya paints, where they suck. If you've tried to spray Tamiya paints with water or the X28 thinner, it'll dry on the tip, it'll clog in 5 minutes. It's a thing we always have to fight. Well, if you use the Tamiya paints with their own lacquer thinner, a lot of that goes away. So now you've turned them into an acrylic lacquer with the chemical chemistry, but you're now spraying all that stuff out there. And if you don't have the boosts, and a lot of guys, if you're listening, and there's a lot of guys out there that if you're in a small apartment and you don't have ventilation and your neighbors and you're worried about the building codes and the lease on your place, like if you can't smoke in your building, trust me, you're not going to be able to spray a lacquer paint in your apartment and hope it's going to, nobody's going to notice it. So, so these things are, it's like I've had to fight that because I rent. So I know I sympathize with everybody. So.
Yeah. Speaking on kind of related to different modelers that you looked up to, and just want to know a little bit about kind of where you look to for inspiration, and not only just like to different people or different ideas, but I mean just even in terms of like colors. I mean just like anything that you look to normally for inspiration on builds.
There's a couple ways I do it. So for the military side of things, that's the bulk of what I've done. Half of this is based off of, as far as that's concerned, you really need to do some photographic research. So I do have a lot of historical combat photos, library of books that contain this material. That's the heart of it. So for a project for me, from my side, from an armored military side, you'll find a photo of a Panther tank that's been knocked out, and it'll have all these details on it, and you get all excited about it, you geek out on it, and then you build your model, construct it to fit that image, and then you paint it to kind of imaginarily, taking a black and white image and then making it into color. That's a lot of it. And then the guys that you looked at, back then it was Adam, it was Mig, it was Phil's work, Roger Herkman's Dutch modeler who's really good, Mario Eanes from Belgium, amazing armor modeler, paints he takes like a year to do stuff. A lot of those guys, Alex Clark, who works in 1/35th scale is the dominant armor size. 1/72nd scale models are about 2 or 3 inches long. It's actually a larger group of people, but it's just because they're so small, you don't really get a lot of heavyweight model builders that will produce something really that you look at and go, wow, that's pretty crazy. And Alex Clark is one of those guys. He scratch builds a lot of details in that scale, and it's, you know, they're 2 or 3 inch models are retardedly small. You're like, dude, what are you doing? Like, how do you even do that? And he's fantastic. And what I always love too is when guys they'll take a picture and you can't tell what scale it is, which is a great indicator of the quality of the finish. Fools your eye. So if you have a really tiny 2 or 3 inch model, you know, if you built a 1/144th scale Gundam and it you can't tell, like it could look 1/60th scale to you if it's painted that well. That's kind of a goal. I was looking on. I'm rolling through my Facebook page right now because trying to find the influencers, because there's a lot of names out there. There's another one, Marin Van Gils. Anybody out there that has looked at Marin Van Gil's work, you will know that this guy's from another planet, specifically. He does. He started in the armor world again. Another gentleman who would go to this Euro military show I mentioned in the south of UK, and he would win best of show with his work. And he does these really creative dioramas, and the dioramas would be armor focused, but there's always hyper creative characters and stories. And he's a figure sculptor now, so he will sculpt his own figures in scale. Frank Zappa, the musician, he did a Frank Zappa piece in 1/35th 54 mil scale, which is about a 3-inch, you know, tall figure for the non-metric people out there, where it was like it started black and white, and it was like a blended. I don't even know how to describe it. He was jumping with a guitar, and the first figure is like white. There's a second figure that's gray that is he morphs. It looks like a stop motion animation, and the final figure is full color, and it's all scratch built. And it's Marin Van Gils. He did his recent piece now is I think there's a book out on it where he took a 1/700 scale aircraft carrier from World War II. I want to say it's the Lexington, which is one of the early World War II battles where the carrier was sinking, and he's got the entire crew in 1/700 scale, which is about 2 millimeters high. Fully painted on the deck, jumping off the ship as it's sinking into a destroyer in the water. Like, it's ridiculous when you see it. You're like, what? And I had a conversation with him last year when I visited Europe in Hungary, actually. I ran into Marin. I hadn't seen him in a while, and I know him really well. And he's an archaeologist for the Belgium Archaeological Society or whatever. He's one of their main archaeologists. So he hunts dinosaurs down and stuff like this all for his regular job. Like I said, he's from another planet. Like, you just don't meet people like this that are like, that's like a normal guy. You're like, what?
Yeah.
What are you doing? He told me he would every night. I think he took a matchstick, and there's little photo etch pieces. You can buy photo etch sailors in 1/700 scale. They're flat 2-dimensional little cut pieces of metal, but they're just little sailor shapes or whatever. He took a little piece of like super glue to make a head, and it would turn around because he took a little drop of glue. And so he'd spend I think he made like 2,000 figures this way. You know, he would take the flat photo etch pieces and he can make them dimensional. And that alone made my brain hurt. So I was just kind of like, because 700 scale is, you know, if you think about it, I don't think Gundam comes in 700 scale. That's so small. I think 500. I think 500.
550, I think, is the smallest that I think.
So I think the actual aircraft carrier alone is like maybe 10 inches long. And then the people are, you know, 1 or 2 millimeters high, some of them. And there's a little destroyer. So Marin Van Gils, if anything he's ever done, he's a master storyteller. And if you read my books at all, you will always hear me at some point in the book talking about the story of the vehicle, you know, what it is. So that was a huge influencer, and he judged a lot of the contests I participated. He was so good, he was like a head judge half the time. And I would listen to him because what the things were that he was looking for that would influence me as a modeler were the little keys that I was taking away to go back to my workbench, you know, like Geppetto, and I'd start making my next Pinocchio. So it was kind of, he would say stuff like, if we saw this at a show, and by this he means like a technique or like a painting style. He said, I want to see what the guys not doing that are doing, and then how well they're executing it. Because it's like, if I've seen that painting style 10 years in a row, trust me, I don't care anymore as a judge. Like, I get it that you can do that. But I want to see the guys that will do one form of painting, and they'll jump over here and they'll try this, and they'll come up with something entirely new. And he said, when that happens, that's when I start to really pay attention. And that's what was influencing me. So when I write that kind of into the books, I write that love of, okay, don't get stuck in the fact that you're going to put the same color wash on 10 different models. Don't do that, because all your models will look the same. Like, that conversation happens at very high levels, and in the judging in the contest world and stuff like that. That's what trickles back down, because they're kind of like our movies. It's kind of like when the Avengers come out, it'll trickle back down into the rest of the comic book world. So it's kind of like when guys like him would say something, that will trickle back down, and that was really what was pushing me, as an artist. So that's something I was really, to me, like, what really gets me going is like when I go on the internet and I look at other people's work, and it doesn't matter what I'm looking at. It could be Gundams, it could be World War I aircraft, it could be a ship, it could whatever it is. I'm looking for the guys out there that are really pushing themselves to branch out from what we're just contemporarily seeing all the time. And those are the guys I start to sniff out a little bit. Sometimes they're not well known, but Facebook is making that a lot easier. The groups and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of something I've always really paid close attention to is kind of those like Lincoln Styles is a great conversation piece because it's so unique to my world. Nobody hand paints in lacquers in my world at all. So when I see it, I'm like, wow. But Calamity, Luca from Italy, Calamity makes all sorts of these amazing resin mechs. They're all his own designs. Great stuff. Well, he paints very similar to how Lincoln paints too now. And but he also combines some of the stuff that I do. Some of the hairspray chipping, where you paint a color down, you spray some hairspray over it, and you paint a second color. And then with the water and some brush, you can scrub it off because the hairspray will dissolve, and it will take the top layer off. And it makes these beautiful chips. And of course I talk about it, but Luca does that too, and he combines that with what Lincoln does a little bit. And so there's guys out there that do that stuff. Those are the ones that are worth paying attention to, and then trying to really say, okay, how am I going to get to that level? And so I kind of do a little bit of my own enthusiastic model building guy. Like, I put that hat on, and then I go, okay, well, how can that be incorporated into an educational piece of, because everything I try to write about is really helping you guys out. Okay, like, well, this idea, if you want to achieve this thing. So I'm looking for guys out there like that. That's kind of like what I look at in the hobby world now, because I'll walk around shows and you'll see all sorts of the same thing over and over and over again, and then somebody will be trying something different. And it could just be, some guys will try like a black and white piece where they'll paint the whole model in black and white tones, so it looks like a photograph, kind of a thing. Or some guys will just something that they're trying to do differently. I'm trying to think of something that what it would be specifically, but you know it when you see it almost. It's kind of an easier way to say it. It when you see it. There's
just something really unique.
A guy in the Mac world now today who also dabbles in the armor world, Brian Kruger, Machining Kruger, also fairly well known now, I would say. Brian BK, he does a lot of crossover stuff that's really interesting because he takes the skill. He's very similar to kind of like the same thought process that I use. He'll take the armor modeling styles and they'll apply them to the Mac and to the mech and to the Gundams that he does, and vice versa. He also reverses it, which is really nice to see. So, fantastic artist as well.
I know there's just on a kind of side note about that. I know there's some kind of different models and things that are kind of like traditional style like tanks, but they're a little bit sci-fi kind of twist to them. Like one company, I think it's kind of new one, like Rocket Models. They have this kind of line. Have you heard about that?
I've not heard of them. No.
It's Rocket Models, and I think like the name of the line is like the Fist of War line, and they're like quadruped tanks.
Oh yes, these are where they're kind of World War II looking tanks, but they're on walking chassis. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you got? Obviously, I guess you
I'm googling
tried
as you, okay. Yes. So the company Model Collect, which is a company I work with, just starting to work with a little bit. They've supplied me with some kits for SM books, some traditional military. But yeah, he started to do their company in China started to produce the Fist of War stuff. Yeah, where it's basically a German king tiger and it's got these huge legs that it walks on. Yes, that crossover thing is what really is perfect for me, because I can paint this in my stuff, but it's a science fiction piece that appeals to a lot of you guys. So it's for me. That's I I have some interest in this. And there is a little bit of a side story with this company, because and one of the ones they do is they use the German E100 tank, which was a prototype.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was my very first armor kit that I put on the web, on the forums back in the day, 2003, 2004, was an E100, and it was a 35th scale Dragon kit. And I took the turret and I chopped it all up, but I made another turret out of it, and just kind of a prototype look. Like, because I'm really big in this kind of idea where you have these kind of crossover appeal where it's like a real thing, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And I called it the E100 OFS B, and OFS AUSF is a German abbreviation for variant. It's that's what it translates to. Is this is the B variant of this particular tank, and became pretty popular. Trumpeter, the Chinese kit manufacturer, decided they're going to make that kit as a tank.
Really?
Yeah, and they kind of did it without, like they thought nobody would notice, and then all these people were like, "Michael, check this out, because it kind of looks like your tank." So that was kind of a thing. But Model Collect also makes that particular kit, because it's part of this series where they've got E100 stuff in the Fist of War things. And he's a really nice guy. He's really cool. He's like, yeah, I know about that story. So he puts my name on the box art, and he sent me some kits. So I've got a bunch of stuff to do with this company. So I'm excited for it, because it is kind of the tank guys are like, dude, what is that? And then you guys are like, oh, that's awesome. So it was an interesting little response.
Yeah, I think so. Speaking about like doing some like modification, scratch building, and that's another big thing in like the Gunpla world, of course, is like scratch building, or building the entire thing, or of course kit bashing is another thing that we do a lot of.
I love kit bashing.
Is that something we might see you do in one of the future books?
Yes, absolutely. Because so what I like to do, I don't really build a book like beginner or advanced level. So what I like to do though is cover what I would say like an out of the box build, and then like a modified build, and then like a heavy build that would include a lot of kit bashing and or a lot of scratch building, to kind of cover the ground for the various types of builders out there. Mostly I'm known for painting weather, and that's a fair argument. I don't do a ton of construction in the book or show assemblies too much. I kind of skip through it. But on the projects I do a lot of that kind of work on, the kit bashing and the scratch building stuff, and or adding or the aftermarket conversation where you're basically modifying all the kit parts with aftermarket. I will get heavy into that conversation when it happens. I don't do it every time, and the reason I don't do it every time is it's pretty simple. I'm a one-man company. If I did that every time, I'd never get anything done. Yeah. So they're often very involved projects. So and there's better builders out there than me, and I recognize that too. I'm pretty decent. I can cut and trim and sand and modify stuff pretty well. But they're the guys that excel at that. If I'm going to work with them, like sometimes there's a guest author that is better at that than I am, then I will say, hey man, I need you to really push the photography here, take a lot of pictures of that. So it's kind of the combination of what I'm really good at, and then combining it with some other guys that are even better at that type of, because I like construction, don't get me wrong, but painting and weathering to me is the funner part. And sometimes it's the opposite. Some guys love to build and they hate painting. So it's you find all sorts of stuff like that. But yes, definitely.
Sure. That's one question that I've gotten a lot personally, is what is the step of the process that you really hate the most? What would you say is
there's a few
part of the process that you hate the most?
In the tank armor conversation, it's sanding the road wheels. And if anybody that have tried tank modeling to a large extent, if you get into like a Panther or a Tiger, I think there's 30 or 32 wheels per side, 64 per tank. And if you're doing 4 or 5 of those, that's hundreds of wheels to sand. It's tedious. The seam lines, you click them off the sprue, and then you're sanding those. That's something I just abhor. I actually pay guys to do that now sometimes.
Really?
I do. That sounds completely snobbish and everything, but honestly, you don't need me to be sanding road wheels, kind of in the book kind of a thing. Like nobody cares.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't sound snobbish to me. It sounds like, hey, if you can swing it, then absolutely.
Smart. I don't like photo etch. I love what it does for a model. I don't like working with it. I'm leaning towards now when I build, if I have to do a change I look at how I modify the plastic first, and then if I can add styrene plastic bits and pieces to it to improve the look before I step into the photo etch world. Because I hate the mix of super glue, the CA glue, I'd rather stick with styrene stuff because I'm better at styrene modifying than
Yeah.
at photo etch bending and soldering and gluing that to the model, and then it becomes super delicate because then you can
Yeah. Yeah.
bump into it, that stuff falls apart, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
That drives me insane, and I'm really slow at that too. So I'm slow to begin with, so it even makes me slower, which it just drags out. In your kind of conversation of Gundams and stuff like that, the one thing I didn't like so much was it's hard to work. I don't know how you say this. My process is when you're dealing with an arm and a leg and a torso and a head, maybe just because I'm not super familiar with it, but kind of you always have to attach them and unattach them and then put them back together. It's hard to paint them as one thing because it's hard to paint the inner thigh area of a robot, so to speak, and what I do.
Yeah.
So it was hard. I had to, and this again, I think it's just because I'm a newbie to the actual process of production for it. Is how do I photograph this? How do I reassemble it? How do I take the pictures necessary for you? So that kind of thing, that slowed me way down with the Gundam. And custom painting a Gundam is way harder than it sounds, by the way. If you're anywhere anal like I am and you want that paint job to come out singing, looking good, and oh, that's money right there. That's a gold shot. I repainted mine a couple times, and I talk about that too. I'm like, damn it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we all make mistakes. Don't think that, the thing I like to tell people is the only difference between me and everybody else is that when I pick up the paintbrush, the mark I leave on the model is typically about a third the size of what you do. And that's literally the only difference. If you could do that, trust me, everything would, because I paint and sand. I mean, I glue and sand the way you guys do. I mean, I'm not doing anything special. The photography is a little bit, I take some time with it, but the actual painting work, the airbrushing work is pretty standard. I mean, once you learn how to airbrush, we all do it the same way. So it's just the refinement of the finish is where the difference really lies. But I make mistakes all the damn. I mean, I made so many mistakes in this hobby, it kills me all the time, everywhere. But I hide them. So I take a mistake and I go, okay, well, that's a new special effect. Look at that thing. And that's oftentimes conversationally from the professional, where I bet Lincoln and some other guys will back me on this, is oftentimes you'll be pushing to a model and something will happen chemically. Like something will, oh, fuck, I don't want that to happen. You get really upset, but like, you know what? You have to keep pushing on because you have a deadline. You can't strip it. You can't take the paint off of it and keep, go backwards. So learning how to work with mistakes and learning how to work with errors is probably the other big difference between professionals and hobbyists. Honestly, I know there's what Lincoln said was the deadline's the main thing, but learning how to work with your mistakes is what makes a professional. That's
interesting.
That's a very deciding factor, because if I went through all my work and pointed stuff out to you guys, you would never know it, because I'm able to either incorporate it and move on, or I change the direction of the model completely, because sometimes you'll get something happen and literally, unless you start over, you either have to change what you're going to do with it, meaning the finish, the colors, the weathering, the process of the story, what you want that model to represent could change. It's probably easier in armor to do that because it's, if there's thousands of Tiger tanks. So if you make a mistake on this one, you can kind of go, okay, well, I'm going to kind of pretend it's this one instead. Gundams, there's only one Red Sasabi. There's only one Charby, there's only that guy as one. There's not like thousands of Red Sasabis flying around. So some of them you can't do. That's actually one of the reasons I stepped away from that paint job of the actual, the real one, is because there's literally only one. Sidebar, I think that's going to affect me with Star Wars too, by the way. Luke Skywalker's X-Wing fighter, there's only one. There's only one, well, there's multiple Millennium Falcons, but there's, whatever movie you're doing, there's only that one. So I don't know if I'll do custom Star. I've kind of wanted to, and then I backed off. Kind of like, well, I'd like to repaint one of these, and I think you can play with it a little bit, but I don't think there's a lot of wiggle room for acceptance of that. Gundams, you guys are a little bit more accepting of it, but I don't think Star Wars will be.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, there's people of all over the spectrum of that, right? Well, Mike, there's a lot of other things that I think we could go on to talk about, but I want to just kind of wrap it up. But one thing I do want to make sure that we talk about before we wrap up is your Facebook Q&A sessions, which you alluded to a while back.
Oh, yeah.
So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Okay, so Facebook Rinaldi Studio. My Facebook page is the work Facebook page. Every Friday or Saturday, I'm changing the times up a little bit to hit more of a global audience. I'm trying to find the sweet spot. As Zach and I have talked about, I'm in Portland, Oregon, West Coast, U.S., which is literally the worst time zone to coordinate anything else with anybody in Europe, East Coast, U.S., Asia, Australia. It sucks. So we're either early morning me or late night for you guys. Anyway, what I do is I will propose a topic. And it's model related topics. So pigments, how to work with pigments, the dry earth powders to make dirt and mud with, and or, how to work with tracks for armor guys, how to work with oil paints, which I have a technique, oil paint rendering, how to work with a hairspray and doing chipping and making paint chips. And it doesn't matter what the subject is. So every Friday I'll ask this question, and then you guys come into my Facebook page. It's not a video. It's just purely old school, typing it in. Ask your question about it. Usually it's like, I'm having problems with this, or this. And then I will look at it and I will answer the question as best I can. Providing, oftentimes with them, guys are struggling with this technique. And I go, well, this is because you're doing it this way, and this way. And you need to do it this way, and this way. So, and I will try to provide photos that are relatable anytime I can do it, because I've got just a mass library of photos that I have. And then if you have photos too, I tell the guys, hey, pop into the session. So for example, it's West Coast time, Friday, noon to 2. So that's East Coast, 5 p.m., Europe, 9 to 10 p.m. or so, and then Asia, it's usually, most of you guys are asleep. So I did switch the time last one to 11 p.m. my time, which was morning for you guys in Asia. So, and then it was a general painting and weathering session. And they're all on my Facebook page. I'm going to do a PDF version. I have a friend who is capable of taking the Facebook conversation, and he makes a PDF of it and he sends it to me, and I'm going to put them on my website, the RinaldiStudioPress.com website, for future free download for you guys. So, and I don't know how long I'll keep doing it. We're on number 7, so I've been doing it almost 2 months now. Response has been strong, and everybody, I love what you're doing with the Q&As, and every now and then you'll get somebody who will come in with a question that just like blows it wide open, like, okay, this is what we're looking for. It's the one question that a lot of guys will wonder about, or how do you do this, or I'm trying it this way and I can't seem to get it to work, like what's the problem? So and then real quick, I'll touch on the book production for you. So I use Adobe InDesign as all my layout software. Everything I shoot is done through Adobe Photoshop and edited, and then I will shoot I always shoot a high-res JPEG on my camera, so it's a 300 DPI file. And then I always import it into Photoshop, and they're all switched over to CMYK for printing. And anytime you print on paper, you need a CMYK image, and you should be around 300 DPI. You shouldn't really mess with those ideas. If it's a digital PDF and you're never going to print on paper, you can play with that and keep them RGB. But from a technical spec standpoint, that's how I function. So I have a camera on a tripod, and I shoot that way. I have a Nikon and a Canon now. And I shoot all my stuff that way. So all my images are processed as high resolution, 300 DPI, CMYKs. And then I make the JPEGs from that, which is what I post on the internet. So make your high reses first, because you can't go backwards. You can't make a low res image and then make it big, obviously. So that's your photography. And if those of you listening, and even you, Zach, if you're going to start doing stuff that's explanatory in sort of the formats of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you have to get in the habits of taking pictures. It's the picture you don't have is the one you always regret you missed in the book. So always overshoot whatever the subject matter is. In my case, there's always like 20 shots of me in a brush, but I only use 1 or 2 of them. But I have them if I need other versions, other angles, points of view. In the book scale modeling world, that's kind of the basic principle of it. Tripod, good light source. Those of you out there that sidebar, if you take a lot of photos of your work and you really want to get really, really good at it, shoot all your photos of your scale models while you're doing the process at night. The reason you shoot at night is most of you work from home or in the hobby room at home, and the ambient light will change the colors of your model from week to week to week to week, to day to day to day. I'm in Portland. We have clouds one day, rain the next, sun the next. So the ambient light constantly changes, and the white balance of your camera is the most important setting you almost need. So always use a custom white balance setting, and every camera will tell you how to do that. Set your custom white balance and shoot at night. Your colors will be the same if you have the same lamp, same lighties all the time. And that's how mine is. So I can shoot a model September 2017, and today, April 2018, and I have the exact same color spectrum because I shoot at night. It's a controlled spectrum. So all my colors, all my stuff that you see is consistent. So if I'm telling you this bottle of paint, this is what it looks like, it'll look the same a year later if I shoot something similar with that bottle of paint and I spray it, and you can compare it and it'll look basically the same. So those of you taking it seriously out there that really want to get good photographs of your models, the trick is shoot at night. And that's usually not too hard because most of us will be, up on the bench at night anyway. So if you're shooting during the day, you'll get color shifts, you'll get shadow shifts, you get pink shadows, blue shadows, yellow shadows. You want a gray neutral shadow under everything that you shoot. And that's your baseline, because the gray neutral shadow means all your color spectrums will be in line. So the colors you're showing us, those are important things, believe me, because that's what ups the quality of the product. And then everything from InDesign, when you make your layouts and you're all said and done, I type in the layout directly. So when you read my text in the thing, I'll have the picture on the layout on the computer, and I'll be typing the paragraph in the layout format itself. I do not type in Word and then import it. Some guys do that. That's really the common way. Everybody types it all in Word to get it all grammatically correct, and then you import it. The problem with that is it's like a puzzle. You have to fit that in there. So I reversed that because I did so much publishing. I'm like, okay, write it in the layout. And then when I wrote it in the layout to fit, then everything happens really, really nice and tidy, and it's really clean. I'm not, pushing text to the next page. And, so when I try to, as a publisher, I try to put the text that's relevant to the photos on that particular page. I tried that really hard. I try to stick to that. The SM Books is easy. Tank Art gets a little messy sometimes, but so if you're doing that, and so you can do it right in a Microsoft Word, and then import it over into the layout software. InDesign is pretty much a standard now. I don't think there's really any other layout production software out there that's really, Quark used to be the old one in the 80s and 90s, but it's kind of been squashed by InDesign. The Adobe setup's really nice now. It goes through the Adobe Cloud if you want to, all that whole thing. You can put your photos, you can put Premiere for video, and blah blah blah. All that stuff is all through Adobe. So that works. That's why I do that. It's really seamless. And then it's printing. So when you're done, when you're ready to go. Nowadays in the world, it's super easy. There's a setting in InDesign for export, and you have your PDF setting. What you're basically going to do is you're going to send it to the printer as a PDF digitally. You're going to upload through their transfer site. It'll go to them, and they're going to get a high resolution PDF that's printable format. And those are basic settings. Anybody can Google that, and you can what's a printing PDF setting off of InDesign. And that's how I do it, and that's basically it. And then the printer will send me color proofs. I'll give him the size specs and the paper specs, so you have to know what paper you want to use. And but those are easy. Like if you've never done it before, and you go to a printer and you say, "Hey, look, I'm doing this kind of a book. I want this kind of a quality," and they'll give you samples and say, "Hey, we suggest this or this," and you get prices. And but printing, the thing with printing is, unless you know somebody, you're going to need quotes from multiple printers, because printers are, I don't want to call them gangsters. I'm not going to call them criminals. So I'm not going that way. But they have price ranges all across the board, and if they smell somebody they can squeeze, they will. Yeah. So it's really good if printing is all about numbers. It's all about the quantity. So it's like if I can print 5,000 books at like $3, then it's a $15,000 print job. Or if I can print 10,000 of those same books at $2, it's $20,000, but I got twice as many, or whatever it is. So it's like what your end game is. If it's retail, if it's just I want to print 500 to 1,000 to get them to friends, to buddies, to sell whatever, or if it's like I want to make this a company. Yeah. Printing is super based off of quantities. Large publishers will print 500,000 to 1 million copies of a monthly issue. On the fashion world, Vogues and those things they'll print heavy numbers. Us small hobby guys, we're printing a couple thousand, 5,000, maybe. I've printed Tank Art 1 3 times now, and I've printed and sold almost 15,000 copies of that particular book. So it just kind of depends. Just kind of depends on how it goes. And one last little trick: if you're pricing this stuff out, and if you're trying to sell a product, in the printing world, you want your cover price. I don't know the terminology, but basically whatever your unit price is, you times it by 10, and that's what your cover. So if you're buying a book from a printer and it's $3 a copy, you're selling it for around $30, because that covers all your costs. That's basically how printing works, publication works. because basically if you're trying to get an Amazon's going to take a percentage from you, wholesale, which is, how kits do the same. It's actually the same conversation for injected molded kits.
Yeah.
You have your die, you have your tool, you're gonna pop out 10,000 copies of that kit, and that costs, the company $2. So they're not going to sell it anything less than $20 probably, because they're going to sell it wholesale for $6 to this guy over here who's going to buy 1,000 of them and then sell them, at retail price at $20. So that's basic, production math.
Basic production, but it's amazing how people can kind of forget that when it comes to complaining about the prices of things, right?
It is. It's a big price, and it's the hobby. And this is a sensitive subject. It's on the lower end of the scale. Most hobbyists they want everything for free, and that's kind of, it's funny because other hobbies like photography is retardedly expensive. Our hobby is really an expensive hobby. I mean, even a $50, $100 kit, it's nothing in the comparative conversation of what other people pay for some of the hobbies they're interested in, some of the equipments and stuff we have. So we're a pretty inexpensive hobby in general.
I suppose it comes down to the volume of how much you're really buying.
It's the collector mentality that takes over.
Yeah.
I got to have that kit. I got to have that kit. I've stopped doing that. I used to have a stash of 300, 400, 500 kits at a time, and just closets full of kits. And I'm like, do the math. You build one of those a month. If you're that fast, you're building one a month. That's, I don't know. That's a few years worth of thing. So I sold a lot. I sold a lot of it. I realized with injected molded kits and eBay and stuff like that, you can literally almost find any injected kit in history nowadays, and even this hyper rare ones aren't even honestly that much money. So maybe some of the early Macs. I think some of the Mac kits, some of the early Nitto and Wave kits that are now that Hasegawa's back and they're all back, there were some prices that were getting a little stupid. But in some of the resin, obviously some of the resin and some of the Wonderfest kits, if you get some of the real hardcore one-offs, they're $300, $400, $500, But that's probably the upper end of it. I mean, you can find $40, $50, $60 plastic kits all day long, $30 kits, $20 kits. I mean, it's not that big a deal. So I stopped buying them. I said, okay, fine. If I'm building, I'll have like 4 or 5 just to tickle that funny bone. But my stash is, I think I counted the other. I'm down to 60 kits in my stash, so that's small for me.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. But it covers everything. There's armor in there, there's aircraft, there's some Gundam in there, Star Wars is in there, Some guys will have 60 Tigers. So there's
could be
60 Mustang fighter planes or ME-109s or whatever it is. So
sure.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, thank you a lot for sharing. Like I said, I think we could go on for quite a while on a lot of different
I'm chatty. Yeah, if you have
ranges of the topic. But it's good.
Comfort.
There's obviously a lot of great information that you've got that you can share with us. So we may have to just plan to do a part 2 or something sometime later on.
I'd love to.
Anyway, those of you guys who have been listening, thank you so much for listening as well. And do make sure you check out Mike's site, Rinaldi Press. And
Rinaldi Studio Press. Yeah.
Rinaldi Studio Press. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
And the Facebook's just Rinaldi Studio on the Facebook. By the way.
Okay, maybe that's why I was getting.
I know
because I knew that they were a little bit different.
Facebook did that to me years ago, and I just left it that way. So
okay, but yeah, guys, and if you haven't checked any of the books, do check those out as well. Mike, anything else you'd like to plug? I think we've pretty much covered most of it, but
there's I guess if I'm plugging anything, SM456. And I forgot to mention there's a technique guide series I'm starting. So TG01 is on oil paint rendering, which is discussed in the SM03 Sasabi book about the oil paints and how I weather with them. It's a book basically just on the technique. And then there's a second one on just the hairspray chipping technique called TG02, Technique Guide 02. And I'm starting a technique series, and basically I describe it as if you're going to play 18 holes of golf, that's what the regular books are because they cover the entire model. But if you want to really master your stroke, your golf swing, the technique guides are designed to help you master your technique specifically. That's the difference between the two. So, those are coming. Those are all available for pre-order on the website. Hopefully April, May, June, and July, I'll be basically printing and producing all these books in the next 3 to 4 months coming for this 2018.
So you're just a little bit busy these days.
I'm a busy. Yeah, no, I'm gonna have to later today. I'm gonna be taking some photos and stuff of some of the current stuff going in. So yeah,
Well, I appreciate you taking some time. And those of you guys listening, you don't know this, but Mike and I have been trying to get this set up for a while, and so I'm just glad that we were finally able to.
No, this is a really good conversation too. We got really going well. So
I appreciate it. So thank you guys for listening, and I'll let you have the last word there, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. I appreciate the opportunity to kind of touch a different group of guys, which is really cool. So it's something I hope to keep doing with everyone, and enjoying the Gundam and the mechas and all that stuff as we get into just a hobby that's it's never ending. It's awesome. Mm-hmm. So I'm super excited for the future.
For sure. All right. Well, we'll see you guys next time.
Take it easy.
Bye-bye. Thanks for watching. See you next time.